Hello everyone, how's it going? It is Tyranor as always, and some more questions have piled up, and I suppose it is time for another Q&A video. Now I should mention that I have some medical stuff coming up later this week, nothing too important or major, just something that will take up much of my time, and because of that I wanted to do this Q&A video since it's much lighter on the editing side of things. There will also be a lore facts this week later on. In the background there's footage from my Warcraft 3 Day of the Dragon custom campaign, the one created by Outsider XZ, especially since I suppose I'm just not ever going to touch Warcraft 3 again after what they did to it. And also in the background there are people working in the street because it's an election year and that's when stuff gets done in a very sloppy fashion. There you go. There aren't as many questions as there were last time in the previous Q&A, but again, I just wanted to post some content, and I think it's better that these Q&As make for shorter videos rather than the very long form ones. So going once again in chronological order, the first question is from Sluxluxer, and that's a funny name to say, who asked, is Undermine the capital of goblins and is it in any of the books? And I'm also going to attach my answer to this. And as I said, my answer, theoretically we don't really know about the status of Undermine after the Cataclysm, after Deathwing did whatever he did to Kazan, which either destroy most of the island or only build water port, whatever you want to interpret it. And Kazan, as I mentioned in answer to his question, only appears in Gallywix's short story Trade Secrets of a Trade Prince. Now, I will mention, and as I said in the comment, that Undermine itself is somewhat detailed in the now non-canon RPG books, but even they're not to a very great extent. It's not anything very interesting or surprising, but feel free to take a look at those depictions, even just keep in mind that they are non-canon. So there you go. Next question is from Kunik61, who asked me on my top 10 dragons video, why does everyone ignore Tyrygosa, who was amazing in the manga? And as I told him, I like Tyrygosa. I don't love her, but I like her. There are just too many good dragons to fit into a simple list, and this is really the reason why usually when I make top whatever list I choose very arbitrary and almost random numbers, because it's easier to choose to make a list of characters and then say, oh, I like number 7 much more than I like number 8, so let's make this the cutoff, then force myself to name 10 or 5 characters when, say, the bottom 3 of that list are characters that I wouldn't really care much about, just as an example. So Tyrygosa herself, yeah, I think she's awesome. I think she's a bit overshadowed by Kalagos, naturally. I mean, she appeared for the most part in the Sunrow trilogy and in the what's it called? The Nether Dragon comic, the one where Ragnarok Bloodreaver, my avatar, is from Nexus Point, the Nexus Point duology. Both written by Richard Knack, and she was pretty great in both of those. In the Sunrow trilogy, I thought she was very much overshadowed by Kalagos, as I mentioned, but in the Nexus Point duology, she is pretty much her own character, and she is very interesting and well done there. Not as spectacular as the other dragons that were on that video's list, but again, there's a limit to how many I could put on the single list. I wish, for instance, I could have put Onyxia on that list. Just as a side note, that video was made long before Chronicle Volume 3 detailed all of the machinations of Onyxia and such. There you go. Next is a question from Christian Weibrecht, I hope I said that right, who on my previous Q&A video asked me if I'm going to frequently flaunt my cat on social media like the cynical historian does. Since I mentioned that I have a cat, she's sleeping right over there, and I had a cat on my previous Q&A video, and I also put a picture of her on it, and I probably will do so again because she's adorable in my opinion. And in answer to that part of the question, no, probably not. This is mainly Warcraft channel. I'll just occasionally mention her on my Q&A videos, and if, for example, if I ever do a live stream or whatever else and she decides to pop up, then sure, she can hang out and I'll show her. I do have my own private Instagram account for like my real life friends where I post only pictures of her, but that's again just for me. And the second part of his question was when, why, and how did I learn English? Because I am Romanian. I learned English pretty much almost at the same time I was learning Romanian. In that, when I was young, I used to watch a lot of cartoons, and the cartoons at that time were English and undubbed in Romanian. And that's how I learned English, at least initially. And even by the time, and this isn't necessarily meant to brag, just rather a bit of a statement of fact, by the time I was 5 years old or so, my parents used to say that I knew English better than they did. Um, and I obviously learned English in school, but I was mostly just nailing down the grammar. I mostly already knew how to express myself in English, and in general, I speak English pretty much like I speak Romanian. I sometimes think in English. Just as an example, when I was younger, in my very socially awkward teenage years, when I didn't really talk to many people, I talked more in English since I spent more time on the internet than I did in Romanian. And even in my high school, if I remember correctly, people used to say that I spoke Romanian with an English accent. There you go. So yeah, I'm pretty much completely bilingual because I watched a lot of cartoons. And uh, pro tip for parents: children learn languages very easily when they are very, very young. And if you want them to learn a second language, put on cartoons because those are entertaining in that language. That's how I learned, and I learned it fairly well at the time. Obviously, you need a school to nail in the grammar side of things, and I obviously don't want to dismiss the importance of school under any circumstances, but that's how I learned English. The next question is by Miguel Francesco Hogar. I hope I said that right. Who asked on my Fell Orc lore facts video if the Chaos Orcs have been retconned or not, presumably in reference to how in Warcraft Reforged they are referred to as Fell Orcs. And as I answered him, probably not the events entailing the Chaos Orcs themselves, as in the temporary corruption of Grom, Hellscream, and the Warsong clan, again. And that there were some Chaos Orcs maybe guarding the Dark Portal for the Horde. Maybe, depending on how you wish to interpret it. So probably that in and of itself wasn't retconned, but the term Chaos Orc was probably retconned. And Chaos Orc, well, after Warcraft 8 hasn't really appeared much. It's appeared a bit in the now non-canon RPG books, but not in World of Warcraft itself. So yeah, there was always a bit of a fringe case, so there isn't really much of an issue with the term Fell Orcs. Well, I suppose with the exception that Chaos Orcs are reversible. I mean, they can revert to being normal orcs, and Fell Orcs, the cure for that hasn't been discovered yet. So I guess there is that little fringe difference. But other than that, yeah, they're more or less interchangeable. They do chaos damage. That's why the term came up in the original Warcraft 3, because they did chaos damage that could deal full damage to all armor types. There you go. Next is a question from Heath N, who asked on my video on Afterlife's Ardenweald if does that video mean that all of the wild gods that were dead before the Shadowlands will then stay dead. And as I answered him, probably not. I mean, the Ardenweald, the keepers of Ardenweald, were charged with ensuring that these wild gods eventually are reborn again, and they sacrificed Ursoc in order to ensure that all of the other wild gods that they had left would not die. So no, I wouldn't say that unless they are confirmed to be sacrificed perma-dead. I wouldn't say that they are perma-dead. Ursoc was an unfortunate exception to the rule. Next is a question from Christian Weybrecht again, who asked me if I have any thoughts on the Fury's Pyromancer, who is another YouTuber, has derived after the Afterlives series. And as I said to him, I don't really watch Pyromancer's content, nothing against the guy personally, I just don't really have the time in a day to keep up with every other lore YouTuber. I usually just try to keep up with my friends and people who I have collaborated with. So no, I don't know what theories he's come up with. I know from many people that I follow on social media regarding lore that many of his theories tend to be far-fetched in their eyes at least. So I guess there's that. Again, I don't really have an opinion on the subject because I don't really know. I only know what I've heard from second-hand sources, and those second-hand sources say that his theories are far-fetched. There you go. Next is a question from Victor Voya, who gave his thoughts on the Afterlives video series and asked me if I did anything about the Discord channel that I mentioned in my previous Q&A. No, I haven't. There just hasn't really been any stated interest in it. I'm not against the idea, I'm just there hasn't been any interest in it. I will mention it again in one of my more mainstream quote-unquote videos, like in a lore facts or something like that, to say, hey, are you guys interested in a Discord, let me know. And if people are, then I'll create one. Again, I've never used Discord in my entire life, but I'll try to figure it out somehow. Next is a question from Branca Leone, I hope I said that right, who asked me, as I have a degree in medieval history, would I consider making a lore fact about some medieval topics. And as I told him, I've considered, and I'm still considering for a very long time, on making videos on history topics, I should say. The problem with that, with history in comparison to Warcraft lore, is that history is much, 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 much deeper than Warcraft lore. I mean, for a lore fact, I usually have to refer to, say, in general, obviously, a few quest lines, one or two books, some manga maybe, so maybe like 4 to 5 sources per lore fact, give or take. But for what I would consider to be lore facts in actual history, no, though you could make actual PhDs and books and write books about lore facts in medieval history, and obviously people have. So if for a Warcraft lore fact, it would be, say, 4 to 5 sources per fact. For a medieval history topic, it would be, say, 40 to 50 sources per fact. This is again a very arbitrary, I just made it up number, but it's true nevertheless. So no, not under a lore fact umbrella. And I'm not going to do very basic banal stuff like, oh, did you know that the Vikings didn't actually have horned helmets? Because, well, one, everyone's already doing these facts type of things for medieval history, and secondly, I think it's a bit disingenuous. I mean, it's just a few sentences. When actual historians, including myself for instance, put a lot more work into their research, it's not really very honest of me to do that. But again, I'm very open to the idea of making history videos and or incorporating history into my Warcraft lore videos. I'm just not very sure how, and I'm still thinking about it, especially on, and not just on the theoretical side on what kind of video it would be, but also on the technical side. I mean, I can't exactly use Warcraft assets to depict real history, generally speaking. Next is a question, well, more of a rhetorical question from Monkpaw Fire, who asked on my top 5 ogres video if they actually stole up Apexis for power. And yeah, on Draenor, after the collapse of the Apexis society, well, not immediately after, but about 1,000 years ago, so if I remember correctly, about 600 years after the collapse of Apexis society, Apexis crystals began to be in demand for the more magically inclined races. And now the Iroquois were always interested in it because it was their society and they knew more or less the value of Apexis crystals. Then the ogres became interested after the Iroquois first taught the ogres arcane magic, and then the ogres discovered, oh, these Apexis crystals that the Iroquois want actually have some magical power. And from then on out, they were very, very interested in it. Fun little side note fact, ogres used Apexis crystals to create the red pox, which was a disease that afflicted the orcs, and it's the reason why we have Magar orcs in the main universe, not talking about the alternate Janor ones. So yeah, Apexis crystals have pretty much, not always, but for a very long time been an object of interest for arcanists on Janor, especially ogres and Iroquois. And after the races of Azeroth arrived on Janor, and after Outland exploded, etc., etc., other races became interested in it as well. And them as well, I should say. Next is a question from J. Willy series, I think that's how I should say it, who asked me when does the Traveler series take place timeline-wise. It takes place after Cataclysm, and I think shortly after Pandaria was discovered. I think there's a few mentions in it about Pandaria, or I think it was stated in an interview with an author about that it takes place shortly after Pandaria, one of the two. But it doesn't really matter. The events of the Traveler series, which I've often talked about on this channel, are very much separate from the main storyline of the expansions. And as I mentioned in my answer to that comment, the only really relevant fact is that there is an Alliance versus Horde war going on, and that Varian King is king of the Alliance, of Stormend rather. Other than that, as I said, the Traveler series is its own very separate thing from the main storyline of the expansions. It involves some threats which are not mainstream at all, well, mainstream, which don't have any direct connection to the villains of the expansions, well, with some exceptions in that they're kind of related to the Burning Legion, but that's really about it. It's its own thing, as I mentioned, and I would actually say that the main plotline is the weakest point of the Traveler series. Not that the Traveler series is weak, and I don't think the plot is weak by any stretch of the imagination. Rather, what I found the most interesting and charming about the Traveler series was its character interactions, how it described the world from the point of view of someone who is not High King of the Alliance or the Chronicler of whatever. It's just a kid trying to learn about the world from first-hand experiences, pretty much. And that's what I found the most interesting about the Traveler series, not the main plot itself, again. And the final question is one from Blazin Dragon, I think that's how I should say it, who asked me if I can do a video on the Desolate Council. For those of you who are unaware, the Desolate Council is a council who only appeared in the Before the Storm novel, which was the prequel to Battle for Azeroth, and they were basically a council of Forsaken who governed Undercity while Sylvanas was away in Stormheim and Orgrimmar doing Warchief stuff, etc, etc. And can I do a video on them? First off, he asked on one of my Lore Facts videos, and no, it couldn't be under a Lore Facts umbrella because there isn't that much to say about them enough to warrant a Lore Facts video. Lore Facts is usually meant for trivia that's not as well known as a general idea. And the Desolate Council is both a fairly unknown piece of lore, but also one that doesn't really have much background to it. But otherwise, maybe I'm not ruling out making a video on the Desolate Council, just I'm not sure of the exact format it would take. Probably one of my very general lore videos, like the one I just did on, well, not just, but the one I did recently on Naval Warfare or on Rhaegal Valdred, which are very separate and don't really follow any specific format, but are more of a free form. So maybe in that regard I could do a video on the Desolate Council, but again, there isn't that much to say, so there you go. And that's the final question. Thank you very much for watching and listening to me. Keep those questions coming. Please let me know what you would think about the Discord. Again, I will mention it again at some point in one of my future videos. And other than that, I wish you all very best.